The disappearance of a celebrity is one of the most intriguing mysteries in our world. It's baffling how someone can be a prominent figure in the limelight, but still disappear in front of the eyes of entire nations. And yet it does happen. From fledgling musicians to influential politicians, it seems that some people are simply dealt a tragic hand, regardless of their status. Join us for today's episode as we examine 3 cases of famous people still missing in 2025. Sean Flynn. Sean Flynn was born on May 31st, 1941 to Australian-American Hollywood icon Errol Flynn and French-American actress Lily Demeter. The couple had married 6 years earlier when Errol was relatively unknown, and they divorced in 1942, following a tumultuous union in which Errol accused Lily of being unstable and violent. Following the split, Sean was raised mostly by his mother. He attended school in Lawrenceville, New Jersey, and following his graduation, he enrolled at Duke University in Durham, North Carolina, but dropped out to pursue a career in acting. Sean had a few minor roles before landing his first starring role in The Son of Captain Blood, the sequel to his father's hit film, Captain Blood. Shortly after signing the contract for the film in 1961, he also signed a recording contract for High Fidelity RV Records, with whom he'd already recorded several songs. Throughout the early and mid-1960s, he took on several other movie and TV parts, including Stop Train 349, Mission to Venice, and The Temple of the White Elephant. However, by 1964, he'd grown bored of acting. Though he took roles until 1966, he spent his free time trying new things. In 1964, he spent time as a game warden in Kenya and sought to become a safari guide. He mostly returned to the screen when he needed money. His final and 8th film, Five Ashore in Singapore, was filmed in 1966 and released in 1968. In January of 1966, a few months before the filming of Five Ashore began, went to South Vietnam as a photojournalist, initially working for the magazine Paris Match, then Time Life, and then for United Press International. It seemed that this career path worked well for Sean. Before long, his photos were being published in magazines and papers internationally, and he made a name for himself as a journalist who was willing to go into high-risk areas and even put himself in the middle of combat in order to obtain photos that weren't just good, but which showed the brutal and tragic realities of what was happening around the world. For months after arriving in South Vietnam in April of 1966, Sean and his patrol, consisting of several U.S. Green Berets and non-mercenaries, were ambushed by the Viet Cong. At the time, he was carrying an assault rifle, and he was suddenly thrown into combat, forced to fight his way out along with the other men. He escaped from the conflict with little more than a knee injury, and later reflected on the situation, stating, "I thought not only me, but all of us were greased." Later that same year, he reportedly saved a group from disaster when he identified a mine while taking photographs of the soldiers, allowing them to avoid any casualties. In 1967, Sean headed to Jordan to cover the Arab-Israeli War. He returned to Vietnam in late 1968 following the Tet Offensive, and while working as a cameraman for CBS News, he was injured during a fight between U.S. and North Vietnamese forces. He traveled to Cambodia in 1970 after learning that the North Vietnamese had been pushing into the country. Sean was last seen on April 6, 1970, when he was just 28 years old. He and fellow photojournalist Dana Stone decided to travel from Phnom Penh to a press conference in Saigon on their motorbikes, while most of their fellow reporters opted to travel via limousine. Steve Bell, the last reporter to see them alive, told The Independent, and no one ever saw them again. "I think they were among the first to go missing. It had not reached the point where we knew quite how dangerous it was." Both Sean and Dana had been eager to interview the troops and didn't seem intimidated by the violence they could face. By June, around 25 journalists had been captured in Cambodia, for having been apprehended earlier on the same day that Sean and Dana disappeared. 3 of these journalists were returned to their respective countries, but some were killed and many remain missing. Neither Sean nor Dana have ever been seen again, and their bodies have never been recovered. In the following years, there were many rumors and theories about their disappearance. Reports from indigenous sources claim that the two were killed in 1971 in Cambodia. Others, including an intercepted radio message from Viet Cong leadership, implied that the two were still alive. Some reports noted that there were rumors amongst small Cambodian villages that a movie star was being held. Following his disappearance, Sean's mother, Lily, spent much of her wealth looking for him. She was never able to find him, however, and he was declared legally dead in 1984. She died 10 years later, still not knowing what became of her son. In 2010, breaking reports emerged that the remains of Sean had been discovered, even though they were still awaiting DNA testing. The body had been found by two amateur bone hunters, who in a controversial move sought to then sell the story of their discovery to the highest bidder. Journalists, including Tim Page, a colleague of Dana and Sean, who had looked for answers himself, criticized the excavation of the remains, noting that it had been carried out unprofessionally and may have disturbed a large grave which held the remains of other missing journalists. Tim stated that he had excavated the same site in 2009 and had found bone fragments and teeth that were handed over for testing. The remains found by the bone hunters were reportedly located after a local man claimed that he'd witnessed the execution of a tall, blonde foreigner who had been forced to dig his own grave before he was beaten to death. In June, however, test results showed that the skeletal remains did not belong to Sean. Neither Sean nor Dana have ever been found. Weldon Keys. Weldon Keys was born in 1914 in the city of Beatrice, Nebraska. After graduating high school, he attended university and rejected the idea of joining the family manufacturing business. Instead, he pursued more creative interests and started writing. In 1937, he moved to Colorado, where he began a degree in library science and met a woman named Anne Swan, whom he married later that year. While residing in Colorado and settling into his new life, Weldon started writing his poetry and stories more regularly. His novel, Fall Quarter, was written in the late 1930s, and although he sought to publish it, the publisher backed out of their contract following the 1941 attack on Pearl Harbor. The novel is described as a dark, satirical comedy, and the publishers were concerned that Weldon's jabs at small-town Americans would look unpatriotic given everything that was going on in the world. It was later published in 1990, long after he'd vanished. The year of 1941 wasn't all bad for him, however, as his short story, The Life of the Mind, appeared in Best Short Stories. Weldon subsequently moved to New York, where he released his first poetry collection in 1943, The Last Man. In the following years, he moved between New York, San Francisco, and Cape Cod, working various writing jobs, including as a film critic and scriptwriter. He was, by all accounts, a very blunt and forthcoming sort of critic, referring to T.S. Eliot's play The Cocktail Party as appallingly amateurish, and describing paintings by Robert Motherwell as monstrous and unfathomable. Notably, though he had no training as an artist, Weldon would begin creating his own pieces, which were often abstract in style. By 1950, he had his work hung up alongside the likes of Picasso. But Weldon continued to create poetry. In 1953, he collaborated with a jazz clarinetist to write several ballads, and over the coming years showed more of his art, this time collages at exhibits. In 1954, however, his life took a turn when his wife's alcoholism and paranoia gave way to a mental breakdown. She was institutionalized shortly afterwards, and Weldon filed for divorce. He began writing the book Nonverbal Communication with psychiatrist Jürgen Rush around this time, which was a result of his time spent working as a research assistant at a psychiatric facility in the early 50s. To illustrate the book, Weldon began taking photographs, which was another new creative outlet for him. Despite all of Weldon's artistic endeavors, however, none seemed to net him the success and fulfillment he was searching for. His musical collaborations landed him no hits. A film company he set up ended in a lawsuit, and a building he'd leased to put on performances was closed by a fire marshal in 1955, just days before the opening of a play he'd written for his actor friends. Furthermore, Weldon's